Under the Indian presidency, the United Nations Security Council is set to discuss Afghanistan. The announcement was made by the Indian envoy to the United Nations, T.S. Tirumurti, who is also the president of the council. He confirmed in a tweet that the UN Security Council will meet to discuss and take stock of the situation in Afghanistan. The UNSC has already refused to support the restoration of the Taliban in the war-ridden nation. At the customary presser by the UNSC president on the first working day of the council, Mr. Tirumurti said the situation in Afghanistan is of deep concern to all members of the council, and he added that in recent days violence in Afghanistan is only increasing and there have been incidents of targeted killing. Mr. Tirumurti also argued that India has supported every opportunity to bring peace, security and stability to the region, and the question of violence and the targeted attacks should be addressed. Fighting between Afghan forces and insurgents has been particularly heavy around the city of Herat and Lashkargah and Kandahar. In the south, there have been increased civilian casualties, destruction or damage to civilian houses and critical infrastructure like hospitals too. The United Nations has expressed deep concern over the safety of residents who could be trapped amid the heavy fighting.
Moving on to Afghanistan, I can tell you that we're deeply concerned about the safety and protection of people in Lashkargah in the south, where tens of thousands of people could be trapped by the fighting. Our humanitarian colleagues also tell us that in Helmand and Kandahar, there are reported increased civilian casualties, destruction or damage to civilian houses, as well as to critical infrastructure, including hospitals. Hospitals and health workers are becoming overwhelmed by the number of wounded people. We, along with our humanitarian partners in Afghanistan, are assessing needs and responding to it in the south as access allows.
Amidst rising fears of war crimes by the Taliban, the European Union has called for a permanent ceasefire in Afghanistan, issuing a statement condemning the killing of civilians in places like Lashkargah. Continuous territorial expansion by an emboldened Taliban has exposed how the Afghan government's strategy to keep its cities and provincial capitals safe is coming up short. The terror group is rapidly closing in on the heart of Afghanistan, Kabul. There's been intense fighting just a few kilometres from the capital. WION's Anas Malik travelled to the province of Wardak, which is at risk of a Taliban takeover.
About 50 kilometers from Kabul lies the province of Wardak, also known as Maidan Wardak. Located in central Afghanistan to the west of capital city Kabul. Wardak is almost a 2-hour drive away from Kabul, a picturesque but bumpy ride. En route to Wardak, we cross Pagman and Karga. Pagman, which is known for tourism, Karga for its scenic lake formed due to a dam nearby. Pagman also remains at significant risk of a Taliban takeover.
I'm standing in Pagman district of Kabul. It's southwest of Kabul that is known as the tourist destination. Pagman has repeatedly come under attack by the Taliban. As recent as just a week before, 5 policemen were killed here, the responsibility of which was claimed by the Taliban. This is the city center of the Pagman district.
From Pagman, Wardak is almost an hour's drive, with frequent Afghan military checkpoints in between. At the gate of Wardak, beyond a checkpoint, the days are with the government and the nights are with the Taliban. Wardak has seen plenty of Taliban attacks. As recent as May this year, the Taliban staked claim of the Jalrez district.
The province of Maidan Wardak has come repeatedly under attacks of the Taliban for the fact of its close proximity to the capital city of Kabul. It's located about 30 miles southwest of Kabul. As latest as May this year, the Taliban have claimed to have overrun it. You'd see plenty of police and army convoys on the roads in Hummer vehicles like these in a bid to protect and guard the city. I'm standing at the main city chowk of Wardak, which is known as Vilayat-e-Wardak. One cannot move without any security in order to report from here.
Fear rules this province of Afghanistan, despite the Afghan army's deployments and continuous efforts to push the Taliban back. Here, locals remain dismayed with the government's strategy. With Anas Malik in Wardak in Afghanistan, Bureau Report, Beyond World is One.
The terror group has already reportedly killed hundreds in Afghanistan, but the situation continues to worsen with every passing day. And now, two of the UK's former defence ministers have called on Prime Minister Boris Johnson's administration to return British troops to the region, following their planned withdrawal this month. Tobias Ellwood and Johnny Mercer have urged the British government to show international leadership. As quoted by the Daily Mail newspaper, Mr Ellwood said the UK is capable of acting without the Americans, and it's time to prove it. Mr Ellwood is currently the chairman of the House of Commons Defence Committee. The Tory MP said, and I quote, "Horrific local, regional and international consequences of US troop withdrawal are just starting to unfold." In a tweet, he added that history will show that our failure in Afghanistan, culminating in the UK's abrupt retreat, will be the biggest own goal made by the West so far this century. His colleague, Johnny Mercer, echoed those sentiments. He wrote that Britain has aircraft all over the Middle East and the UK should be dropping bombs and killing the Taliban. No call for air support from Afghan troops on the ground should go unanswered, he said. The UK, a NATO member, sent its troops to Afghanistan in 2001. Its mission was due to end as US President Joe Biden announced the withdrawal of remaining American-led troops from Afghan soil. In these 2 decades of deployment, nearly 450 British troops have been killed in combat. Most of the casualties took place in the Helmand province, where intense fighting is currently underway. Mr Ellwood fears that if Britain doesn't step up, then everything that they fought for since 2001 could be lost. Germany, France and Israel will go ahead with plans to administer COVID-19 vaccine boosters. That's disregarding an appeal by the World Health Organization to hold off booster shots until more people are vaccinated around the world. France is working on rolling out third doses to the elderly and vulnerable from September, whilst Germany intends to give boosters to patients with impaired immune systems, the very elderly and nursing home residents from September. Both states have so far given at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine to more than 60% of their populations. Almost 50% of their citizens have been fully vaccinated. And Israel urged older citizens to get a third shot of the vaccine, after the government last month kicked off a campaign to give booster doses. The US has said that it will provide a third vaccine dose if needed, and that it will also donate the surplus vaccines to poorer nations. The country has the world's largest vaccine supply. 70% of its population has received at least one dose. The World Health Organization's called for a suspension of booster shots until at least 10% of the population in every country was vaccinated. The organization's chief believes global vaccine supply should be used to inoculate the population of lower-income nations. 80% of all COVID-19 vaccines have been given in richer nations.
We need an urgent reversal from the majority of vaccines going to high-income countries to the majority going to low-income countries. Accordingly, WHO is calling for a moratorium on boosters until at least the end of September to enable at least 10% of the population of every country to be vaccinated.
The decision of these countries to press ahead with booster shots despite the WHO's appeal highlights huge inequities as richer nations ramp up programs to protect citizens from the more infectious Delta variant. Less than 5% of the doses administered to date globally have been in Africa, whilst over 50% of the European Union's adult population has been fully vaccinated. The conflict in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region is worsening as rebel forces take control of the town of Lalibella. The town, which is a holy site for millions of Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, is also known for famed churches that are a UN World Heritage Site. Eyewitnesses say many residents have now fled after the rebel forces took over the town. In recent weeks, the conflict has spread from Tigray to neighbouring areas of Amhara and Afar as well.
Forces from Ethiopia's Tigray region have taken control of the town of Lalibella and residents were fleeing, 2 eyewitnesses told Reuters on Thursday. Lalibella's famed rock-cut churches are a United Nations World Heritage Site. It's also a holy site for millions of Ethiopian Orthodox Christians in the Amhara region in the country's north. A resident of Lalibella spoke to Reuters by phone and said he saw hundreds of armed men speaking Tigrinya, the language of ethnic Tigrayans, walking through the town on Thursday. He said they were not speaking Amharic, the language of the people of Lalibella, and were wearing different uniforms from those of the federal military. He said forces from the Amhara region, which are allied to Ethiopia's central government, fled on Wednesday night together with local officials. A second man told Reuters by phone he left Lalibella on Thursday morning as Tigrayan forces were arriving. Reuters could not independently verify the eyewitnesses' information, and spokespeople for the Prime Minister, the Ethiopian military and a government task force on Tigray did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Fighting has spread from Tigray into 2 neighbouring regions, Amhara and Afar, in recent weeks, forcing around 250,000 people to flee. Senior officials from the United Nations and the United States government who visited Ethiopia this week also raised alarm at the widening of the war in Tigray to other parts of northern Ethiopia.
Let's shift our focus to West Asia. The years-long shadow war between Israel and Iran has escalated. Both countries have attacked each other on land, by air and at sea in recent years. Now Iran has been blamed for a deadly drone strike on an Israeli-operated tanker in the Gulf of Oman. Iran has denied involvement, but Israel has threatened retaliatory attacks on Iran. When asked whether Israel is prepared to assault Iran, the Defense Minister Benny Gantz gave a one-word answer, and that answer was yes. Iran has responded to Israel's threat. Taking to Twitter, the Iranian Foreign Minister wrote that in another brazen violation of international law, the Israeli regime now blatantly threatens Iran with military action. Any foolish act, he says, against Iran will be met with a decisive response, and he warns Israel not to test Iran. This comes after the attack on a tanker that led to the deaths of a British and Romanian national at the end of last month. On August 3rd, Britain, Romania and Liberia informed the United Nations Security Council about their suspicion of Iran. In the recent report on the Gulf of Oman incident, the victim nations claim that Iran used 1 or more drones to carry out the attack. The British Foreign Minister Dominic Raab and his US counterpart, the Secretary of State Antony Blinken, were united in their condemnation, whilst Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has threatened to expose Iran with evidence.
The intelligence evidence for this exists, and we expect the international community will make it clear to the Iranian regime that they have made a serious mistake.
Meanwhile, tensions between Israel and Lebanon continue to escalate too. On Thursday, the Israeli Air Force launched strikes at Lebanon for the first time in 7 years. According to Lebanon's Hezbollah-run Al-Mana television, Israeli aircraft carried out 2 strikes at around 12:40 a.m. local time, around 11 kilometers from the border. People living in and around the area share the moments of that midnight attack.
الساعة 1:03 بالليل سمعنا انفجار كتير قوي وعينا نقزانين عليه. رجع بعد شي دقيقتين كمان انفجار قوي وصوت طيران. يمكن قدرنا انه هيدا قصف طيران ولكن كان القصف كتير مدوي، ارتجاجات قوية واكيد مخيفة جدا للعيال وللولاد، خاصة انه نحن من 2006 ما سمعنا هيك اصوات.
The strikes come after Lebanon launched rockets across the Israeli border for 2 consecutive days. In a series of tweets, the Israeli Air Force said that rockets were fired from Lebanon into Israeli territory, and in response, Israeli Defense Force fighter jets struck those launch sites. The Israeli Defense Force also said it views the state of Lebanon as responsible for all actions originating in its territory and warns against further attempts to harm Israeli civilians and Israel's sovereignty. Lebanon has condemned the Israeli strikes, with the Lebanese President Michel Aoun stressing that Israel's use of its air force to target Lebanese villages is the first of its kind since 2006 and suggests an intention to escalate attacks against Lebanon. The UN peacekeeping force deployed in Lebanon, known as UNIFIL, said that Israel and Lebanon should act with urgency to de-escalate tensions. UNIFIL's head of the mission in Lebanon met Israeli and Lebanese military officials, where he called on both sides to reinforce security along the border. The United States, on the other hand, has come in full defence of its long-term ally. State Department spokesperson Ned Price says the US condemns the rocket attacks from armed groups based in Lebanon into Israel, and they have made the point that Israel has the right to defend itself. That's your full roundup of the top stories on WION. Thanks for watching.